Unprecedented, shocking, and coordinated attacks on Hezbollah rock Lebanon and stoke fears of a wider war. The U.S. tries to prevent escalation, but Hezbollah calls for revenge.
This will be confronted with a severe reckoning and just retribution in expected and unexpected ways.
Kids around the world have returned to school, including Israelis displaced by war in facilities far from their homes.
If the war ends, I want to go back.
While young Palestinians in Gaza seek safety and a place to learn amid the rubble.
I wish I could go to kindergarten and for the war to end and have a new home.
And we speak to the people who knew Turkish-American Ayşenur Eygi best after she was killed by an Israeli soldier in the occupied West Bank. Welcome to PBS News Weekly. I'm Nick Schifrin. It was a brazen attack on a scale never before seen in the Middle East. Thousands of pagers and walkie-talkies worn by members of Hezbollah exploded over 2 days, killing more than 20 and injuring more than 3,000. Israel has not taken official credit, but U.S. officials confirmed to me that Israel informed the U.S. it was behind the attacks and alerted American officials immediately before the explosion started on Tuesday, but without providing specifics. And on Friday, Israel said its airstrike on Beirut had killed senior Hezbollah leader Ibrahim Akil, wanted by the U.S. for his involvement in the 1983 attacks on the U.S. Embassy and Marine barracks in Beirut. At least 10 members of Hezbollah's Special Operations Forces were also killed in the airstrike. We now take a look back at the attacks on Hezbollah at the beginning of the week. Today, as thousands mourned at a Hezbollah funeral, they had to plan another one. Hezbollah walkie-talkies across the country exploded in Hezbollah members' hands, in Beirut's cell phone shops, and turned scooters into char. The attacks were aimed at Hezbollah militants, but exploded in civilian areas, even in Beirut living rooms, affecting families across the country. They will further inflame Hezbollah and its followers, one day after thousands of Hezbollah pagers blew up in markets, at cash registers, hitting militants where they're most vulnerable. Hezbollah communications networks tonight apparently compromised, and thousands of its rank and file injured, the group in disorder and demoralized. At the funerals today, a shocked and humbled Hezbollah vowed revenge.
This aggression inevitably has its own punishment. It has its own retribution. This punishment will come, God willing.
Officially, Israel has not taken responsibility, but a U.S. official confirms Israel informed the U.S. it was behind yesterday's and today's attacks. Today, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released a one-sentence statement.
I have said it before. We will return the citizens of the North to their homes safely, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
60,000 Israelis fled their northern Israeli homes after Hezbollah opened fire after October the 7th. There is widespread anger at the government that they are still displaced. Today, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, rumored just yesterday to soon be fired, said the government was united in shifting the war's goals away from Gaza.
The center of gravity is moving north, meaning that we are allocating forces, resources, and energy for the northern arena. I believe that we are at the start of a new phase in the war, and we must adapt.
The U.S. has tried to prevent all-out Israel-Hezbollah war with shuttle diplomacy to try and convince Hezbollah to move back from the border alongside a larger Gaza ceasefire. In Cairo today, Secretary of State Antony Blinken called for restraint.
We remain very clear about the importance of all parties avoiding any steps that could further escalate the conflict that we're trying to resolve in Gaza.
On Thursday, Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah vowed revenge. Today in Beirut, Hezbollah buried its fighters and vowed vengeance. And Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah promised to continue attacking Israel so long as Israel continues attacking Hamas in Gaza.
This will be confronted with a severe reckoning and just retribution in expected and unexpected ways. I will not talk about a time, form, place, or date.
But as he spoke, Israeli jets flew over downtown Beirut, and Nasrallah admitted that 2 days of unprecedented attacks on Hezbollah walkie-talkies and pagers had dealt the terrorist group a serious blow and compromised its security.
Tuesday and Wednesday were heavy and bloody days for us. They were also a big test. The important thing is not to let the blow knock you down, no matter how big and strong it is.
U.S. officials tell PBS News Hour Israel hopes that blow to Hezbollah's communication network convinces the group to pursue diplomacy. But there was no sign of that today. In Israel, soldiers rushed their injured to the hospital after Hezbollah attacks that also killed Sergeant Tomer Keren and Reserve Major Na'el Fouars. And Israel's military struck more than 30 Hezbollah sites with hundreds of rocket launchers, part of its shift away from Gaza, said Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant.
In the new phase of the war, there are significant opportunities, but also significant risks. Hezbollah feels that it is being persecuted, and the sequence of military actions will continue.
U.S. defense officials say Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin postponed his upcoming trip to Israel as the White House once again urged restraint.
We are concerned about the tension and afraid and concerned about potential escalation.
Tensions in the occupied West Bank continue to escalate as today Israel raided the northern town of Kabatia, where smoke billowed from residential buildings and a school was surrounded. Palestinian media reported 3 Palestinians were killed and a body was seen lying on the roof of one building. Another video shows Israeli soldiers dragging, kicking, and pushing 2 bodies off a rooftop. The Israeli military said the raids targeted Iranian-backed militants. Children around the world are returning to school, including in the Middle East, and for some, that's in the shadow of war. We have 2 stories now. The first from Tel Aviv, where some of the 60,000 Israelis displaced from their homes from northern Israel return to the routines of school, even though they can't return to their homes. It is a rite of passage with an armed escort. Students arriving on the first day of school after summer vacation, reuniting with old friends, and making new ones with new teachers and 9-year-old twins, Adele and Emma Azulay, and their mother, Liana. But this is not their school, and this city is not their home. They're the displaced, driven from their houses by war.
Most of my students, their house was ruined.
Ofer Zafrani is the superintendent of a school system whose teachers and students have been displaced across the country for 11 months. He says the instructors he briefed ahead of their first classes provide students an antidote to war.
I think the teachers in Israel in general are holding the torch of the hope. They are giving them schedule, something to wake up in the morning, something to do, a goal. All other things are in chaos.
Their homes were in Kiryat Shmona, hit by Lebanese Hezbollah rockets just yesterday, and on 200 separate occasions since Hezbollah opened fire on northern Israel the day after October the 7th. It's the largest town in northern Israel, right on the Lebanon border, mostly empty since the Israeli government forced residents to leave. Last weekend, Israel's military preempted a barrage of Hezbollah rockets and missiles, but some got through and hit homes nearby. A mother and 2 kids living here escaped at 5 a.m. thanks to an early warning with seconds to spare. Israeli Defense Forces spokesperson Anna Ukolov.
You can just imagine, you can see the damage here outside, and you can just imagine what could happen if this rocket was like a few centimeters and hit the house inside. Okay, so the family alive and everything is okay with them. Just, they don't have a place to live now. They need to look for something else. But they're safe, they're alive.
The northern communities are patrolled by soldiers whose own families are displaced, including Lieutenant Colonel Dotan Rizili.
Hopefully soon, as the war ends, either with an agreement or either by us maneuvering into Lebanon, the civilians will feel safe, even my family will feel safe and come back and build this community again. But 10 months is a long, long time for a community like this to be empty.
Which has meant the Azulay twins have lived since last October in this rented apartment, distracted by card games, longing for home.
If the war ends, I want to go back. back.
That longing is shared by the students' teachers, who must provide sympathy despite their own suffering. David Bubb teaches English.
Extremely challenging for all of us because we don't really have time to think about ourselves. Here at school, we're not only teachers, we're psychologists, psychiatrists, mothers, fathers, brothers, anything you can think of. I'm worried about the students. They went through a really tough year last year. A lot of the kids dropped out of school, and a lot of the kids have got lost.
And so on the first day of school, they try to recreate their lost community.
School is not so important to learn, but to be together socially, especially this year that we're separated all over Israel. This is the most important thing.
Israelis still suffer and live with national trauma from the violence and horror of October the 7th. But schools are trying to teach its lessons, especially to older students who will soon join a military that failed to protect the country or its own soldiers.
We thought that we have the strongest army in the world, and then October 7 happened. Next year they are going to go to the army, the same army that was unprepared to the October 7. And we must give them the lesson for what they need to learn from it. Not to be arrogant and not to repeat the history.
That lesson plan is being written in real time, and some answers cannot be found in a classroom.
Now can I ask a question? When can we go back to Kiryat Shmona?
It's a question that not only children ask, it's also a plea for this rite of passage to end for everyone. Meanwhile, most of Gaza's 560 schools have been damaged or destroyed. And that means 625,000 students in Gaza have no buildings to return to. In Deir al-Balah in central Gaza, the classroom is a tent. And the students, displaced children of war. Proud to contribute, eager to learn in a class rather than from the conflict they've been forced to endure.
We're trying to provide relief for children through education and play so they feel better mentally.
Taha Ibrahim is an elementary school teacher, himself displaced, and a volunteer with a French-sponsored program for kids.
As educators, we're trying to help students remember what they have learned and at the same time try and cheer them up and relieve them from the pressure they're under despite ongoing bombing and displacement.
In a neighboring tent, 8-year-old triplets Lana Batul and Lin Abu Aseh with their younger sister Bisan have a message for the kids around the world starting school this week.
We're supposed to go to school. Everyone is going back to school except us in Gaza. You're so lucky.
They've lost their home and been displaced multiple times, but have held on to their dreams.
I wanted to be a doctor because I want to help people who aren't feeling well.
When I grow up, I want to be a teacher so I can teach kids and they can learn.
And so the triplets leave their canvas home in the Al-Zawaida camp, which has been their refuge for months, and cross just a few steps over the sand to arrive at their canvas school. Tent classrooms like these are all that Gaza's children have. In a war where the UN says more than 9,500 children enrolled in schools have been killed. Gazans say the entire educational infrastructure has been eviscerated. The UN says at least 85% of Gaza's schools have been directly hit or damaged. And in this war, and in every war in Gaza, UN schools transformed to shelters for nearly 2 million displaced, like the Abu Hamisa school in Al-Barej camp. Classrooms once filled with students, now home to families with nowhere else to go. Clothes rather than chalk, dishes rather than drawings, a kitchen and a bedroom all piled up in a corner.
When we used to go to school, they would teach us that school is our second home, but now it is in fact our only home.
Onana Abu Al-Khair was studying to be a dentist at one of Gaza's top schools, Al-Azhar University, seen here before the war and today. The UN says all of Gaza's 12 universities have been damaged or destroyed. Israel blames Hamas for living in and fighting from residential buildings and using schools turned shelters as cover. Despite it all, Onana Abu Al-Khair tries not to forget what she's learned or what she's lost.
Gaza was beautiful, with its people, busy streets, and food. We want to go back to that because we cannot get used to the situation we're in right now. We are not resilient. We are forced and obliged to live this way.
Her mother, Suhair.
It's as if we're dying slowly while still alive. We want these young kids and students whose life was taken away from them to be able to live again, so they can get up, get dressed, wear their uniforms, eat breakfast, and go to school, see their teachers and their friends, study and excel.
But those are dreams deferred. UNICEF estimates all of Gaza's children, 1 million people, need mental health and psychosocial support. They have seen too much and had to grow up too fast. Miriam Al-Nabahin is 4.
Our home was bombed and there were injured people everywhere. There were rocks, little tiny rocks. I wish I could go to kindergarten and for the war to end and have a new home.
But for so many, there's no going back. Back home, back to school, back to what childhood is supposed to be. The United Nations this week once more called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and for humanitarian aid access there to be unimpeded. For insights on the challenges of getting aid into Gaza, I spoke to the official who leads the UN's Gaza Humanitarian Relief and Reconstruction. Sigrid Kaag is a Dutch politician, a former first deputy prime minister, and diplomat with years of experience at the UN and throughout the Middle East. She is now the UN's senior humanitarian and reconstruction coordinator for Gaza. She's visited Gaza often since taking over the job earlier this year, and today briefed the Security Council. Sigrid Kaag, thanks very much. Welcome to the NewsHour. In that briefing to the Security Council today, you said the war had, quote, turned Gaza into the abyss. What do you mean?
Well, everything is destroyed. Life has halted. Over 41,000 Palestinians have lost their lives and over 90,000 have been injured. And in that group, you have a lot of women, children who've sustained life-changing injuries. So it is dystopian. It's also very strange when you go to Gaza, and I've been going in and out of Gaza over 30 years, to see that there's no buildings standing. The roads are destroyed. People are all huddled in tents. It's a total life-changing experience for everyone in Gaza and for those who try to work there, to render assistance. It is something that you cannot imagine, let alone describe.
Let me highlight one recent success before we get to some of the specifics you just said. Thanks to agreed pauses in the fighting, the first of 2 rounds of polio vaccines have been completed and have reached 90% of Gaza's 640,000 children. How have the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and UNRWA managed to do that in the middle of a war zone?
Well, this basically is because they agreed and worked closely with the Israeli Defense Forces. And at the political level, I've discussed it with the authorities that there should be humanitarian pauses. The parties to the conflict have agreed, and this gave the space to actually reach people safely and securely. But it also meant we needed the cold chain to work, the equipment, the vaccines to be in Gaza, and thousands of volunteers to be in a position to actually do their job. It demonstrates that you need political will to achieve these kinds of operations because it's highly complex and highly dangerous.
You noted today that the, quote, breakdown of law and order and looting of supplies are impeding assistance distribution. And you also said that there had been denials, delays, and a lack of safety for humanitarian workers. How short is Gaza of the assistance it needs?
Well, the gap is significant, let's face it, and it varies from day to day. It depends on the volume that actually is allowed in, that gets cleared and checked, but also the ability for humanitarians to come to the checkpoints, to the crossings, to retrieve it, to then actually take it back to the warehouses. And that's, of course, also where law and order, safety and security are serious issues. This is not only a matter of supplies to the crossings, it's also our collective ability to receive and distribute. And a lot more needs to happen in order to actually be affirmative in reaching those goals.
The UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or OCHA, says between the 1st of September and the 9th of September, only 62 trucks per day entered Gaza. But if you ask Israel, and Israel's coordinator for the government activities in the territories, or COGAT, they point out that commercial Palestinian trucks are entering 163 just yesterday. So why can Palestinians bring in trucks at a scale that the UN is unable or unwilling to do?
Well, I'm not going to make a blanket comparison here. What's important is that Gaza needs both. It needs humanitarian goods, because they're free of charge at the end of the day for the population, and it needs commercial goods. And the commercial sector has agreements with the IDF, but often it's the commercial sector from Egypt. It can also be from the West Bank or Israel. And they often organize themselves also that they have security on top of the truck, basically. As humanitarians, we can't do that. So we're both vulnerable, but we're also dependent on the approvals given. The most important comparator, I would say, is before the 7th of October, 1,000 trucks a day entered Gaza. So if you add up these statistics, on a good day, currently, 150 and 60, that's only 210. Now you can then easily conclude that it's nowhere near meeting the basic needs of the population. And the needs have only grown because the whole of Gaza lies in ruins.
As you know, Israeli officials question why there is any UN aid or humanitarian aid sitting inside Gaza. They point out the distribution problems within Gaza that you've struggled with. Why haven't you been able to overcome some of those distribution problems?
I would turn the question around. There are roles and responsibilities. Under international humanitarian law, the humanitarian workers need to be protected. They cannot be targets. The safety and security needs to be guaranteed. If the volume is too little or it's too unsafe because the fighting continues, humanitarians can't work. We need a ceasefire and we need the unconditional release of the hostages in order to actually start to reach people in a serious manner.
Sigrid Kaag, thank you very much. Finally, we turn to tensions in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. There, 26-year-old Turkish-American Ayşenur Eygi was shot dead by Israeli soldiers earlier this month while protesting Israeli settlements. Israel said her death was unintentional. President Biden said that was, quote, totally unacceptable and called for full accountability from Israel. Eygi's family said the president's statements weren't enough. I spoke to two of Eygi's friends, Juliet Majid and Kelsey Nabas. Kelsey Nabas, let me start with you. Can you tell me about your friend?
Yeah, so I met Ayşenur a couple years ago on a trip to Istanbul in Turkey. She was such a breath of fresh air and such a light in any room that she walked into. I knew that immediately I was going to be friends with her when I was introduced to her just because of how silly and fun and goofy she was. And I know that after a few conversations, we really hit it off and became super close friends.
Juliet Majid, what do you remember?
Yeah, so I met Ayşenur at the University of Washington. We both graduated this past June. She with a bachelor's in psychology and a minor in Middle Eastern cultures and languages. She was an incredibly hard worker. She was a very staunch activist. She was a community and a campus organizer, spanning many different solidarity movements and programs across the Seattle area. It's a profound loss that we are feeling in our community here in Seattle. And also, it's a profound loss for the American public in general to lose such a staunch American human rights activist.
Kelsey Nabas, why did she travel to the occupied West Bank?
As you just heard, Juliet said she was a staunch activist, and she knew that anything that she could have possibly done here on the ground between the UW encampment and going to protest and advocating for the liberation of the Palestinian people, she knew that going and being on the ground and observing the suffering and observing and witnessing what the Palestinian people were facing would be good for her self-conscious, and also just because she felt comfortable going and being a part of that community.
Kelsey Nabas, as you know, the Israeli military says that it is not defending illegal settlements and is in fact trying to crack down on what they call illegal outposts. And as you've seen, the Israeli military has said that she was not the target of this bullet, that what they called, quote, the instigator of the riot was the actual target and it was a ricochet. What's your response to that Israeli military statement?
I think what's important here today is that anyone should have the right to peacefully protest and peacefully observe a demonstration from an illegal settlement. I don't think that there was any right to have any live ammunition at that type of place. As we know, they were peacefully having their Friday prayer and peacefully demonstrating against the occupation of farmland in the region. And now they're saying that it was an accident, which is completely deplorable for my best friend.
Juliet Majid, what is your message? What is the family's message as well to the Biden administration today?
Yeah, so for me personally, I think that the Biden administration statement today was incredibly shameful to release comment about and support the evidence that the Israeli military gave without conducting an independent U.S. investigation into the killing of an American citizen is very shameful. And I don't accept that. I don't accept that we will accept the Israeli military's evidence or proof. What I want to see, what the family wants to see, is this independent U.S. investigation. Ayşenur was an American citizen. She was an incredible person, and she deserves justice. Her family deserves justice, and they won't get that without an investigation and without the evidence that they are requiring.
Kelsey Nabas, Juliet Majid, thank you very much to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's it for this week's episode of PBS News Weekly. For all of us, thanks so much for watching.
Good evening, I'm Jeff Bennett. Amna Nawaz is away. On the NewsHour tonight, Israel says it killed another top Hezbollah leader, the third major strike on the Lebanese militant group in as many days. In-person early voting begins in this year's hotly contested election. We look at the potential impact split-ticket voters could have on the race for the White House and control of Congress. And in a new memoir, renowned TV journalist Connie Chung pulls back the curtain on how she managed to inspire a generation of women despite rampant sexism.
I decided that I would be one of them. I would try to be one of the boys. I would take pages from their playbook.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Jim and Nancy Bildner, and the Robert and Virginia Schiller Foundation, the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, upholding freedom by strengthening democracies at home and abroad.
It really matters when you have an opportunity to give back.
Being part of something that's bigger than myself, that's what brings me happiness.
Being able to integrate your professional career with some of these other things that are important to you, it's critical to be happy at the end of the day.
You know, this is our community too, and we want to participate and give back to it.
People want those opportunities to make an impact and a difference.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. For nearly a year, the U.S. has tried to prevent the war in Gaza from expanding. But tonight, there are new concerns of escalation after an Israeli airstrike killed a top Hezbollah commander, following earlier unprecedented attacks on the militant group's communications network. In all, more than 35 in Lebanon have died. Thousands have been wounded, and tensions along the shared border are at their highest level in years. Nick Schifrin reports.
Israel has promised a new phase of the war and is delivering it in southern Beirut, where today an airstrike destroyed an entire residential building, and Israel said it killed Ibrahim Akil, commander of Hezbollah's special forces, and about 10 of his soldiers. Earlier this week, Israel's infiltration of Hezbollah's communication network turned Hezbollah walkie-talkies and pagers into bombs. And Israel launched one of its largest bombing campaigns yet, targeting Hezbollah rockets. Thousands of Hezbollah rank and file are injured. The group is in disorder, and after today's strike, without a member of its leadership council.
At the time of the strike, Akil and the commanders of the Radwan forces were gathered underground, under a residential building in the heart of the Dakhya in Beirut, hiding among Lebanese civilians, using them as human shields. They were in the middle of planning more terror attacks against Israeli civilians.
Akil was wanted by the U.S. for the 1983 attacks on the Beirut embassy by Hezbollah's predecessor, Islamic Jihad organization, and the Marine Corps barracks attack that killed nearly 300. Israel says it's trying to return 60,000 displaced from now empty cities in the north and does not want a regional escalation. But Lebanese state media says today's attack also killed children, as did this week's attacks, adding to pressure on Hezbollah to escalate. Just today, Hezbollah fired 200 rockets into Israel. Despite this apparent momentum toward war, President Biden today held out hope for a ceasefire.
We're going to keep at it till we get it done, but we've got a way to go.
A long way to go, as tonight the focus of the war appears to be shifting north. For the PBS News Hour, I'm Nick Schifrin.
The 2024 voting season is officially underway as early in-person voting has started in Minnesota, South Dakota, and Virginia. Meantime, the state election board in Georgia passed a new vote counting rule that has sparked heated debate. Stephanie Tsai begins our coverage in that state, where Vice President Kamala Harris spoke earlier this evening.
Today, the vice president was back in battleground Georgia, where a 6-week abortion ban is cleaving voters.
And her name, and we will speak her name, Amber Nicole Thurman.
Amber Nicole Thurman is a single mother from Georgia who reportedly suffered an abortion-related death. According to a ProPublica investigation, Thurman encountered a rare complication from taking an abortion pill. The report says she died after waiting 20 hours for doctors to perform a surgical procedure that has largely been banned by penalty of prosecution in the state. Harris tied Thurman's death to former President Trump's Supreme Court appointments.
He brags about overturning Roe v. Wade. In his own words, quote, "I did it and I'm proud to have done it," he says. He is proud that women are dying, proud that doctors and nurses could be thrown in prison for administering care.
Also in Georgia today, the state election board passed a new rule that will require poll workers to count all ballots by hand.
The motion passes 3-2.
It's the latest in a series of changes by the pro-Trump majority on the board, and it would require 3 people to count every ballot in every precinct on election night or the day after. Votes would still be tallied by machine.
And what we're doing is creating more stability in our election process.
But several local election officials warned that passing this new rule just weeks before voting will strain workers and resources, potentially delaying results.
I believe the proposals being discussed today introduced huge opportunities for chaos, error, voter insecurity.
I challenge you to go into any county in the state of Georgia and to do the rules that you're passing on today. Work as a poll worker all day and then count the ballots.
Georgia's Republican Secretary of State and Attorney General both opposed the changes, warning it could set up more legal challenges. Meanwhile, last night in Washington, former President Trump took the stage with Republican mega donor Miriam Adelson, an outspoken supporter of Israel. Trump condemned anti-Semitism, But he also criticized Jewish voters for not supporting him in larger numbers.
I wasn't treated properly by the voters who happen to be Jewish. I don't know, do they know what the hell is happening? If I don't win this election, and the Jewish people would really have a lot to do with that if that happens, because at 40%, that means 60% of the people are voting for the enemy. Israel, in my opinion, will cease to exist within 2 years, and I believe I'm 100% right.
Kamala Harris!
Also last night, Harris participated in a live-streamed rally with the Queen of Talk in Battleground, Michigan.
Everything is so expensive.
The vice president took questions directly from audience members and viewers. During a discussion about gun control, Harris told Oprah she's not afraid to use her firearm.
I'm a gun owner. Tim Walz is a gun.
I did not know that.
If somebody breaks in my house, they're getting shot.
Yes, I hear that. I hear that.
Probably should not have said that.
Throughout the campaign, Harris has positioned herself as a Second Amendment defender who also supports stricter gun controls and renewing the federal ban on assault weapons. Tonight, the vice president is on to another closely contested state with a rally in Wisconsin. For the PBS News Hour, I'm Stephanie Tsai.
The day's other headlines begin with the heightened scrutiny over the work of the U.S. Secret Service. Today, the House of Representatives unanimously passed a bill that would boost protections for presidential candidates. Senate leaders haven't yet said whether they'll consider the bill. Meantime, the Secret Service is acknowledging communication lapses and what it calls complacency in the days leading up to and during Donald Trump's Butler, Pennsylvania rally back in July. That's according to a new internal review. Acting Director Ronald Rowe vowed to hold the agency accountable, and he called for major change.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're at a pivotal moment in the history of the Secret Service and at a pivotal moment in the history of our country. And I've directed that the Secret Service embark on a significant paradigm shift that will redefine how we conduct protective operations.
Rowe defended the Secret Service's actions in the apparent second assassination attempt against Mr. Trump in Florida this past weekend, but he called for more resources, saying the agency is simply spread too thin. A severe storm left one person dead in a small city in northeast Oklahoma. Winds up to 72 miles an hour and golf ball-sized hail battered Pawnee, about 60 miles west of Tulsa. The storm flipped multiple camping vehicles and brought down trees and power lines. City officials said the fatality was due to an overturned camper. Many roads and schools were closed today to deal with the damage. There are also torrential rains across western and central Africa that have triggered the worst floods the region has seen in decades. Nearly 1,000 people have died across Chad, Niger, Mali, and Nigeria. Rescue operations are still underway in some areas more than a week after the flooding started. In northeastern Nigeria, the downpours caused the collapse of a major dam. The full scope of the devastation can only be seen from the air. On the ground, refugee camps grow increasingly crowded as hundreds of thousands have been displaced.
With our small children, we don't know where to stay now. The government should be sympathetic to allow us to stay longer in the camp, because if we go back to our house now, we will not have a place to sleep with our children.
Meantime, the worst flooding to hit Central Europe in at least 2 decades is now swamping parts of Hungary. Outside the capital, Budapest, residents dealing with flooded streets due to the rising levels of the Danube. The river is expected to peak later today or tomorrow. And upstream in parts of Poland, the water has receded to reveal the extent of the devastation there. At least 24 people have died across the region. The European Union has pledged billions of dollars in aid. The Federal Trade Commission is suing the nation's 3 largest pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, for inflating the price of insulin. The case accuses CVS Health's Caremark, Cigna's Express Scripts, and United Health's Optum Rx of steering diabetes patients toward higher-cost insulin and reaping millions of dollars in rebates. Such companies are considered the middlemen of the industry. The PBMs defended their practices, with CVS Caremark saying they're being blamed for the high prices set by drug companies. Wall Street ended on a quieter note today after what's been a record-setting week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose by nearly 40 points, inching up to another record. But the NASDAQ fell, losing more than 60 points on the day. The S&P also dipped just beneath its all-time high. And you don't have to be a baseball fan to appreciate greatness. In a record-breaking performance last night, LA Dodgers star Shohei Ohtani put on a show unlike any the game has ever seen.
Ohtani sends one in the air, the other way, back it goes, go!
It's a game that will go down in history.
Shohei Ohtani starts the 50-50 club!
Shohei Ohtani, now the first player ever to slug 50 home runs and steal 50 bases in a single season, blowing by both milestones on one unforgettable night.
I'm happy, I'm relieved, and very respectful to the peers and everybody who came before who played this sport of baseball.
The Japanese superstar, often called a modern-day Babe Ruth, accomplished the feat in typically superlative fashion,
But he got his foot in!
going 6 for 6 from the plate with 3 home runs, 10 RBIs, and 2 steals, an historic feat of its own. Fans in Japan celebrated, while at home, commentators called it one of the greatest single-game performances in sports history.
Shohei Ohtani, the greatest day in baseball history!
Last night's win was storybook for another reason. It secured the Dodgers a spot in the postseason. And with the team now poised for a run at the World Series, fans are hoping for more Shohei magic deep into October.
This is not real life!
Still to come on the NewsHour, Poland's foreign minister considers whether Ukraine should use Western weapons to strike further inside Russia. David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart weigh in on the week's political headlines. And the son of imprisoned Hong Kong publisher Jimmy Lai drums up support from U.S. lawmakers.
This is the PBS News Hour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's drawing up a comprehensive plan for how Kyiv believes the war with Russia should end. Poland has been a staunch supporter of Ukraine in its war with Russia and has taken in hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian refugees. For some perspective on all of this, we turn now to Radek Sikorski, Poland's foreign minister. Thank you for coming in.
My pleasure.
So President Zelensky will soon make public his plan for ending the war in Ukraine. What are your expectations for the eventual outcome of this conflict, and how is Poland preparing for best case and worst case scenarios?
By the way, it's 1.6 million Ukrainian refugees in Poland, and without a single refugee camp because we took them all into our homes. Poland alone has provided $4 billion worth of military assistance to Ukraine. And of course, a war is never won by a single factor, some single bullet. It's a combination of things. I was in Kiev just last week, and what I learned was that Ukraine has now developed an indigenous arms industry that has some spare capacity. So actually, we should help them produce their own weapons. Ukraine also needs to marshal more recruits for the fight. But yes, I visited the Ukrainian city of Lviv, where a townhouse was destroyed by a Kalibr missile, with a man watching his wife and 3 daughters being carried out dead. And that Kalibr missile was launched from a Russian bomber. Tell me why Ukraine should not have the right to take out that bomber before it launches its missiles at civilian targets in Ukraine. I think the victim of aggression has every right to defend herself.
Have you shared that message with the U.S. State Department?
Yes, I spoke about it publicly when Tony Blinken visited Warsaw last week.
And this is the matter that the U.S. has been weighing, whether Ukraine should have authority to use Western weapons to fire and aim artillery deeper into Russia. The concern has always been the risk of escalation. How do you see it?
Well, Ukraine should obey international humanitarian law, obviously. It should use our weapons to hit military targets. But you know, when you say escalation, what do you actually mean? Do you mean nuclear weapons? I think the US has already read the Riot Act to Putin, along with China and India, that is verboten. Other than that, tell me what Putin is not doing that he could do if he gets really, really angry. I don't believe such a thing exists.
What about Crimea? Crimea, of course, as you well know, was invaded and seized by Russia a decade ago. You've suggested that it be put under a UN mandate. Why is that the right approach? Because Ukrainian leaders say that Russia violated international law and that Russia should be held to account.
No, I didn't suggest that. It was President Zelensky who said that perhaps Ukraine will recover Crimea by diplomatic means. And we had an off-the-record hypothetical discussion about how that could be achieved. No, we support Ukrainian not only sovereignty, but inviolability of borders. Russia should get out of Ukraine, including out of Crimea.
Poland has been one of Ukraine's staunchest supporters since this war started. How do you view Poland's role in helping Ukraine reconstruct after this war?
I believe Ukraine, if she wins this war, will be boomtown because it's inherently a rich country, rich soil, cheap energy from nuclear power plants, very good IT sector, and the most experienced army in Europe on the democratic side. Very talented people. But the EU will also help. We should use the frozen Russian assets. The aggressor should pay for the destruction they have wrought. And we have a program of support in the EU of Ukraine. We've given them about 120 billion euros so far, more than the US. And there will be a program of reconstruction as well.
I'm sure you're closely watching the U.S. election. Vice President Kamala Harris says she supports Ukraine in its fight with Russia. She says she's committed to NATO. Donald Trump, in that recent debate, refused to say whether he wanted Ukraine to win. He has in the past said things that many view as undermining NATO. What is your perception of both Trump and Harris, and how would their respective victories, what would that mean for the future of Ukraine and for the future of Poland?
Well, thank you for this invitation to weigh into your internal politics, which I, of course, won't do. But I will be going to Michigan next week to thank the Polish Americans in Michigan for their support for the treaty to enlarge NATO, and I'll tell them that the support for NATO in the United States continues to be very important.
Poland's Foreign Minister, Radek Sikorski. Thanks again for your time. Split-ticket voters, those are people who vote for candidates from different parties, are increasingly rare in modern American politics. But as Lisa Desjardins explains, those that cross the aisle on their ballots this November may decide which party controls the U.S. Senate next year.
We can't work all the time. We have to do something to take our mind off things.
In Annapolis, Maryland, Colin Pascal is still learning the ropes of sailing, picking it up after retiring from a 20-year career in the Army.
Sailing is incredible because it's one of the few times that you can have motion without noise.
Motion without noise, it's not a big leap to see that as a political metaphor as well.
By disposition, I would like all of us to move forward with less yelling.
He's charting another new course this November, splitting his ticket between Democrat Kamala Harris for president and for Senate, the first Republican ever to win his vote.
I'm a registered Democrat. I've been a Democrat my entire life, and I'm voting for Larry Hogan, who's the Maryland Republican candidate for Senate.
Why?
I really do think we're at our best when the center left and the center right are pulling on each other a little bit and we find a workable solution in the middle.
Larry Hogan is a dream recruit for Republicans, a popular moderate and former two-time governor in a blue state, part of a GOP on offense. Senate Republicans need to pick up 2 Senate seats to take over the chamber outright, and just 1 to create a 50-50 tie, which would break in favor of the party that wins the White House.
They have a good map. Of the 34 Senate seats on the ballot, Democrats are defending a whopping 23 of them. One of those, West Virginia, is expected to flip to Republicans. And 7 other Democratic seats across the country could go either way, meaning Democrats have no room for error, no room to worry about a bright blue state like Maryland.
Hey, can I get a photo with you? Of course.
But Hogan is a recognizable force, stopped constantly while campaigning at the state fair.
It's so nice to meet you.
He won nearly a third of Democrats in his 2018 election. Hogan is anti-Trump, key in a state that voted for Biden by 33 points. He needs voters like Colin.
I'm trying to get every veteran and every Democrat in the state for you also, because I'm both of those things.
Well, we just got to convince some of those Democrats who already like me and voted for me twice. It's all about those ticket splitters.
Who else?
But
my first question about Hogan was, well, why would he want to run for Senate?
Pierre Blake will not be ticket splitting this time. The Maryland resident works as a nonprofit executive. She voted for Hogan in 2018, appreciated how he handled the pandemic and that he sent the National Guard to D.C. on January 6th. But in the U.S. Senate, she worries Hogan would give Republicans too much power, a decisive vote against her interests.
Gun violence, there's education, housing, women's rights, health rights, and equality for everyone. So there's a lot of things of Angela Alsobrooks' policies that I like.
Let me tell you. If you're unfamiliar with Angela Alsobrooks, you're not alone. The executive of one of the state's largest counties, she had an impressive primary win. But even so, 1 out of 3 Maryland voters still didn't recognize her name in a poll this month. Alsobrooks is ahead in polls, but knows it's closer than Democrats like. She stresses that voters here are attuned to control in Washington.
It is close because there's a lot at stake here, but I think Marylanders are very savvy, and they will understand the difference between a governor's race and a Senate race, one where our reproductive freedoms, democracy, and so many other issues are on the ballot.
As Alsobrooks and Democrats hope to prevent split-ticket voting in Maryland,
Sherrod Brown wrote the All-American Flag Act.
They need it in other states, like Ohio, where Senator Sherrod Brown is running on bipartisan patriotism and appeals to Republicans.
I'm a Republican, have been my whole life. I don't agree with Sherrod Brown on everything, but when it comes to fighting fentanyl, no one has done more than Sherrod Brown.
Or in Montana, where this is an ad from Senator John Tester.
I'm a lifelong Republican.
I'm a lifelong Republican. I'm going to vote for Donald Trump, but I'm voting for John Tester.
I'm voting for John Tester.
In 2020, Trump won their states by 8 and 16 points. A common theme for Tester, Brown, and Alsobrooks, running on abortion.
I believe it's a woman's right to make our own health care decisions.
With Alsobrooks on the attack, Hogan began describing himself as pro-choice this year.
I ran for governor promising to protect abortion rights, and I kept that promise for 10 years. And now I've said I'm going to be a sponsor of the bill to codify Roe, and I'm going to be a sponsor on IVF.
Had you used the phrase pro-choice publicly as a politician before?
No, because I said, I had my own personal feelings about it, but I wasn't going to always never get between a woman and her doctor to make her own decision.
But Maryland Democrats point out he vetoed a bill to expand access. It would have let nurse practitioners and some others perform abortions. When the legislature overrode the veto, he held back funding for training. It's part of current voter thought. While Colin supports Hogan's approach, it's a deal breaker for Pierre. A split in views in one of the states where voters who split their tickets, or don't, will determine the shape of Washington next year. For the PBS News Hour, I'm Lisa Desjardins in Annapolis, Maryland.
And for more on the 2024 race, we turn tonight to the analysis of Brooks and Capehart. That's New York Times columnist David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart, associate editor for the Washington Post. Hello, good to see you. So the 2024 election is officially underway with early in-person voting starting in 3 states. And this is as the GOP faces a major scandal in a critical battleground state, North Carolina. The state's Trump-endorsed Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson is adamantly denying reports that he had anything to do with racist and sexually explicit online posts. CNN has published a story, and they attribute these messages to Robinson, including one where he characterizes himself as a black Nazi, another where he defends slavery, and it just devolves from there. David Brooks, what does it say about the modern GOP that a candidate like Mark Robinson who had a number of known liabilities up till now. This is not, in some ways, this is not new. What does it say that he got this far?
Well, we should reassure viewers that was the G-rated version.
It
what
was
he actually
the super sanitized version of what is alleged to have been said.
It's nastiness and mind-boggling nastiness. Well, what it says is the Republican Party used to be a normal party, which had the normal vetting procedures. Like you were a college Republican, and then you got vetted by your local state assembly, and then so you had a normal, like any industry, basically, that there's a whole series of structures that people who are just complete opportunists and degenerates, if I can use that word, don't pass through the system. But that whole system was wiped away. And so ever since the Trump era came in, we've had a whole series of candidates who don't pass basic muster and who it's not just skeletons in their closets, it's, I don't know, morgues in their closet. And so this guy's one of them. Will it hurt Donald Trump in North Carolina? I'm a little skeptical. People really know Donald Trump. And so I don't think it'll bring him down. But the guy's is losing in the polls big time, Robinson.
And didn't Mitch McConnell warn about this 2 years ago? He said Republicans have to care about candidate quality.
Right. And he was roundly ignored. He was roundly ignored in 22, and he was roundly ignored now. The ad that the Harris campaign has put out tying Mark Robinson and Donald Trump, I think has two goals. The first goal is to reach those Republicans, the squishy Republicans who are like, I don't like Donald Trump and the way he behaves, but I don't know if I can vote for her. This is a way of showing them that with Trump, you get this kind of chaos. On the other side, because the ad is sort of young and hip in the way they do it, it's showing young Democrats in North Carolina, look, you can either sit on the couch or you can see both of these guys get elected. And this is a reason, the things that they show, this is a reason why you should vote for Harris.
You've described the ad. We actually have it, and we can take a look at it right now.
And he's been an unbelievable Lieutenant Governor, Mark Robinson.
For me, there's no compromise on abortion.
I think you're better than Martin Luther King.
We could pass a bill saying you can't have an abortion in North Carolina for any reason.
The abortion in this country, it's about killing a child because you aren't responsible enough to keep your skirt down.
I've been with him a lot. I've gotten to know him, and he's outstanding.
Donald Trump and Mark Robinson. They're both wrong for North Carolina.
And so, David, in talking with Harris campaign staffers, the reason why they think this scandal might put North Carolina in play is because reproductive rights, in their view, is such a resonant issue in this election. And you can see that in the ad. They're trying to link Mark Robinson to Donald Trump on this issue of abortion rights.
Yeah, I guess the counter argument would be, first, if you're for abortion rights, your mind is made up. Like, you don't need Mark Robinson's case to persuade you. And second, if I could, this is a tangent, but I just think the abortion issue is obviously a great issue for Democrats, but I think the Harris campaign is spending too much time talking about it. They should be talking about the economy, the economy, the economy. And so I think tying everything to abortion rights is probably something they've done enough and should pivot.
What do you think about that, John Hood?
No. I mean, right now, it is an issue. While the message is about abortion rights, it's bigger than that. It ties into the freedom argument. And for a lot of people, the ability to have control over your bodily autonomy has maybe something to do with reproductive freedom, but it also has a lot to do with your economic freedom. And in the stories of Amber Thurman and Cindy Miller, part of the issue here was economics. Amber Thurman could not get back to North Carolina. She couldn't afford to because of the 6-week abortion ban in Georgia. And if I could just have just an aside, for Donald Trump to say that Mark Robinson is better than MLK, he even went on to say that he thought he was MLK on steroids, is it's reprehensible.
Well, speaking of Donald Trump, he spoke at an event last night that was said to have a focus on anti-Semitism, and he appeared to blame the Jewish community if he loses this fall. Here's what he said.
I wasn't treated properly by the voters who happen to be Jewish. I don't know, do they know what the hell is happening? If I don't win this election, and the Jewish people would really have a lot to do with that if that happens, because at 40%, that means 60% of the people are voting for the enemy. Israel, in my opinion, will cease to exist within 2 years, And I believe I'm 100% right.
How do you account for this? I mean, I know the Trump campaign believes that they see gains with Jewish voters as helping them in states like Michigan and Pennsylvania. But is this the way to do it?
By blaming them? Yeah, no, it's not the best sales technique for a guy who used to be a salesman. Listen, I thought the Trump administration policies on Israel were pretty good. I think the Abraham Accords were really impressive. Moving the embassy to Jerusalem was good. I think they weakened Iran during the Trump years. So all that's true, and I'm sure a lot of Jewish voters are appreciative of that. But Jewish voters, like any other group of voters, which is they have a lot of different interests. And I saw a survey they asked Jewish voters to list the 11 things that they are voting upon, and Israel came in 9th. So they're like anybody else. They're thinking about inflation, about healthcare, whatever. And so they're traditionally allied with the Democratic Party because Jewish voters tend to be a little more socially progressive than median voters. They tend to be more urban than the median voters. And so they're traditionally a Democratic Party. And finally, he got the numbers wrong. Harris has 75% of Jewish voters, and he has about 25. So, and finally, just to say, accusing is not a sales technique. And so it's wrong on all sorts of fronts.
Jonathan?
David speaks for me on this. I agree with you 100%. And just sort of personally, I'm insulted on behalf of Jewish people, my Jewish friends, that a person running for president of the United States is already pre-blaming a group of people. If I lose, it's your fault. And I also can't help but think of, you go to an anti-Semitism event and dabble in anti-Semitism, dredging up sort of the dual loyalty thing that really gets under the skin of Jewish American voters, and I think rightly so.
Well, as we round out our conversation, David, your column this past week caught my eye. The title is How a Cultural Shift Favors Harris. I'm going to do that thing where I read what you wrote and ask you more about it. But you wrote, right now, I'd say Kamala Harris is benefiting from the beginning of a cultural shift and is beginning to have the cultural winds at her back. Donald Trump is beginning to be slapped in the face by those winds. Tell me more.
That's such a good opening. You should do that every week. I've been traveling a lot. I've been in 13 or 14 states in the last 2 weeks. Some red, like Nebraska and Kansas. Some blue, like Colorado and New York and California. And one thing I've noticed is people talking about negativity. They're just tired of the negativity of our public life. And there's this periods where you go through periods of indignation where people are really angry. But then you can only be angry for so long. And Donald Trump won because people were really indignant. But my sense is that they've had enough of it. In the 1960s and early 1970s, there were 4,000 bombings on American college campuses. It was a Days of Rage, it was called. By 1974, they're into Est and Crystal and New Age stuff. And so people eventually get tired of all the negativity. And I think that cultural pivot is happening right now at a time when Kamala Harris, and she's not because she's reading it, just who she is cheerful and joyful, and let's not be negative all the time, and let's have a good time as a country. And so I think she's benefiting from the cultural pivot. Is it enough to candor the White House? No, but it helps.
Jonathan, that word joy, Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, when she sat down with the three reporters from the National Association of Black Journalists today, one of them asked her about how she views attacks on her joyful warrior approach. And she defended it, and she said people will try to sometimes use your best asset against you. What do you make of that and this notion that she's benefiting from a cultural wave?
I don't think she's benefiting from a cultural... Yes, she is, and I read your column, David. It's not so much that she's like, see this wave coming and she's riding. No, she is part of the culture, and that's why I think when she became the top of the ticket, everyone marveled at how quickly the light switch flipped. And it happened so organically, in a very dramatic fashion. That to me says you can't manufacture that. And she was able to do that because she is the culture. She is part of the culture. She's part of what's driving this culture that I think you said will slap Donald Trump in the face. It's slapping him in the face now, which is why I think he's so discombobulated. He doesn't know how to deal with her. I think it's why the polls the momentum is moving in her direction. And to your point about happy warrior, and David is right. This is the way the vice president has always been, which sort of reinforces what you're saying. It's not that she has met up with the culture. She, in her entire career, has been the happy warrior about helping people and leaving aside the negativity. it just happens to hit at the right person at the right time.
Is there a cultural or historical precedent for this kind of thing?
Well, yeah, like, look at Donald Trump. He emerged in the 80s, which was an era of self and of money and raw capitalism. The culture was with him, and then he sort of vanished and went down because the culture had shifted. And so we politicians and pop celebrities rise and fall by how the culture moves. And culture really does move, and you get these periods of anger and hostility and conflict. World War I then leads to the flappers in the 20s. World War II leads to the domesticity of the 1950s. So decades shift, and people want something different. And so I think we're in one of those shifts.
Gotta say, I enjoyed this conversation. David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart. Thank you both. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff.
This week, a group of U.S. lawmakers came together in a rare show of bipartisan support to call for the immediate release of Hong Kong businessman Jimmy Lai. Lai, who owned the once popular newspaper Apple Daily, is one of hundreds of democracy activists, journalists, and political leaders imprisoned as part of mainland China's ongoing crackdown on dissent in Hong Kong. Nick Schifrin recently spoke to his son and lawyer, who were in Washington and are fighting to improve his conditions in prison and secure his freedom.
Jimmy Lai arrived in Hong Kong at the age of 12, stowed away on a fishing boat. He worked his way up to become an outspoken pro-democracy advocate and media tycoon. In the summer of 2020, he became the most prominent person arrested under a national security law that punished people not only for what they did, but also what they said. Anyone who participated in actions that Beijing-backed courts defined as calling for separation from mainland China, who received support from a foreign country, or who, quote, provoked the hatred of Beijing, could be arrested and sentenced to life in prison. Recently, Jimmy Lai's lawyers and his son appealed to the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, saying he has been held in solitary confinement for the last 3.5 years, and that poses a grave risk to his life and to his physical and mental health. And I am now joined by Sebastian Lai and Keelan Gallagher, head of Jimmy Lai's international legal team. Thanks very much to both of you. Welcome to the NewsHour.
Thanks for having us.
Sebastian Lai, let me start with you. What's your goal of coming to Capitol Hill and doing interviews like this?
So my ultimate goal is to see my father free before he dies. Coming to Capitol Hill, I want to bring attention to what's happening to my father, to the injustice, and to get support to put pressure on the Hong Kong government and Chinese government to see my father free, and to stop this political persecution of my father.
Keelan Gallagher, as I just said, you appealed to the UN Special Rapporteur. Why, and what do you hope she does?
So Jimmy Lai already should not be on trial. He's on trial essentially for being a journalist. It's a conspiracy to commit journalism case. That's bad enough in itself. But what we also now know is that for 3 years, 9 months, he's been held in conditions which amount to inhuman and degrading treatment in violation of international law, and conditions which we think pose a very, very grave risk to his life and to his welfare. He's almost 77. He's diabetic. He's got various underlying health conditions. He's also been held in prolonged solitary confinement, no access to natural daylight for 23 hours, 10 minutes per day. And he's also a devout Roman Catholic, being denied access to the sacrament of Holy Communion. So the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture has responsibility for holding China to account when it breaches international law. And we've asked her to take urgent action before it's too late. And we see this brave man die behind bars for being a journalist.
Sebastian Lai, as far as you can tell, how's your father doing?
My father is a very strong person. I think as a son, I always view him as that. But his health has deteriorated a lot. So even though he's mentally strong and he knows he's doing the right thing, I really worry that he will pass away in prison. My father has been campaigning for democracy for the last 30 years. And he always had a way out, you know? As in, he could always just retire, go to London. And he decided to make the hard decision to stay in Hong Kong to campaign for what he knows is right. And when the hammer came down, when the national security law came down, he knew that if he left, he would open his journalists up to attacks from the government. And so he decided to act as a shield. And I mean, it's something I respect him immensely for, and it's something I wish I'd have the courage to do as well if I was put in that situation, to stand with your people and to not forsake them when you know that he could very well spend the rest of his life in prison.
Jimmy Lai is on trial for alleged sedition and alleged conspiracy to collude with foreign agents. Do you have any doubt that he will be found guilty?
In short, I'm afraid to say this is only going one way in the Hong Kong system, and he's going to be found guilty. He's being tried under a law which should not exist, in a trial which is profoundly unfair, before judges handpicked by Beijing. He's being prosecuted for being a journalist and for his writing, raising human rights concerns with international human rights organisations, and thirdly, speaking to politicians internationally to raise concern about these issues. Now, all of those things are values the US holds dear, the international community holds dear. He should be praised for doing those things, not turned into a criminal.
Sebastian Lai, what do you want Washington, where you are, what do you want the world to know about your father?
My father has decided very early on, 30 years ago, that there is something that is much more important than money. Hong Kong's a financial center, so it's a driving force essentially. But he realized very early on that, look, if you didn't have freedoms, then what's the point of all of this? I mean, look, the last 30 years wasn't smooth sailing either. Our house was firebombed. He's had an assassination attempt. Someone once skinned a dog, then pinned it on our door. My memory of my father is always of this man smiling, because he knew that despite all of this, he was doing the right thing.
Sebastian Lai, Keelan Gallagher, thanks very much to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Over her decades-long career, Connie Chung covered everything from the Watergate scandal to conflict overseas, landing sought-after exclusive interviews along the way. Her new memoir, called simply Connie, paints a fuller picture of what actually unfolded behind the scenes. Amna recently sat down with the iconic journalist.
On the air, millions watched as Connie Chung reported from the front lines of history, covering U.S. presidents and elections, major world events, and landing interview after interview with major newsmakers. But off camera, Chung battled sexism and racism at nearly every turn, working through the ranks to make history as the first Asian American and just second woman ever to anchor a national evening newscast. For the first time now, she's opening up about what it took, professionally and personally, to get there. Connie Chung joins me now. What an honor. Thank you for being here.
I'm honored to be with you, and I'm so proud of you, Amna.
I'm just curious about what drew you into this field in the first time. I mean, reading your book, I learned a lot about your family. I know your parents emigrated from China in the 1940s. You were born and raised here. No one in your family was a journalist.
No.
What was it about this field that said this was something you wanted to do?
I was born in Washington, D.C., so I knew Capitol Hill and everything. But what I really enjoyed was seeing reporters dashing around and asking questions, impertinent questions of members of Congress. And I thought, this is what I want to do.
When you get your very first job at a local TV station, you're one of the only, if not the only woman, oftentimes in the room, certainly the only Asian American in the newsroom. And you diagnose in your book some of the men that you work with what you call big shot-itis. You write this: it was characterized by a swelling of the head, an inability to stop talking, self-aggrandizing behavior, narcissistic tendencies, unrelenting hubris, delusions of grandeur, and fantasies of sexual prowess. Safe to say you don't hold back in this book. Connie, but how did you cope with all that?
I found them insufferable, and it was it was a syndrome. So I did a crazy thing. I decided that I would be one of them. I would try to be one of the boys. I would take pages from their playbook. I would walk into a room with bravado. I would command respect because I was much taller then because I would wear 4-inch heels. I wanted to be eye to eye with the men. And I took on a sassy bawdiness, which I don't recommend. It's just that...
Bawdiness, meaning you were the first one to crack an inappropriate joke.
Exactly.
Or curse along with the guys.
You got it. And it was disarming, frankly. They knew after a while, after I'd been around the newsroom a bit, that I could get to the bad side faster and funnier than they could. And they were left flummoxed. It was a different era.
Yeah.
Not that a lot has changed.
You don't think a lot has changed?
Well, I think there's a type of acceptance that women have. But I know women who are still experiencing sexism, and I know Chinese people or Asians experience racism. But it's getting better in some ways. There is a better level of equality, but it hasn't reached parity.
You do go on to land what you call your dream job.
Yes.
And you break barriers in the process. In 1993, you're named co-anchor of the CBS Evening News alongside Dan Rather. In that moment, do you feel like all of the hard work, because you had a reputation for being the first to show up, working 7 different shifts, do you feel like it all paid off? It was worth it, all the sacrifice?
When I got that job, I had always wanted to be Walter Cronkite. He was trusted, he was fair, and he did not suffer from big shotitis. He was really a nice person. So to me, sitting in half of Uncle Walter's chair was the ultimate. So I thought I had really hit the jackpot. It was beyond thrilling.
It was 2 years later, though, that was taken away from you.
Yeah, it was.
And Dan Rather went back to
solo anchoring. Yeah, and I think it was coming. I could feel it. I could sense it, and I feared it greatly. But then when the axe fell, I thought, oh my God, it really happened.
Why do you think it fell?
Well, for one thing, it just wasn't working. I think it was very hard for Dan to move over and share the seat. I think it didn't matter if I was a man, a woman, or an animal or a plant. He was not going to be happy.
You do write about the next chapter of your life that opens up very suddenly after you lose that job, and that is when you and your husband, the iconic TV host Maury Povich, learn you're going to be able to adopt a baby boy after years of trying to start a family. You use a phrase when you write about it in the book that I think a lot of women grapple with, and that is the idea of having it all. You say, I'd succeeded in having it all. What did that mean to you then?
Well, I see people like you and other women. You know what I don't know is, are you married with children?
I am married with 2 young children, yes.
2 young children?
Yes, 2 girls, 10 and 8.
Oh my God. How do you do it? Seriously.
I can ask you the same question.
No. But see, I did it backwards. When I was dumped and feeling I had left my life on that anchor desk because it had been all-consuming. You know how the news business is. It's so consuming. 2 days later, we get the call that Matthew is going to be our son, and he would be born. I thought to myself, this was meant to be. So for me, I had a career for a long time, and then I had time to spend with my son, because I never would have quit. My sister said, one door closes, another one opens. That wonderful cliche, but it was true.
Connie, there is an entire generation of women, myself included, who get to have these careers today because of the paths that you blazed and because of the doors that you kicked down. And there's also an entire generation of women who literally named their daughters after you. There was this wonderful New York Times feature called Generation Connie that profiled all of these women. You got to meet them. What was that like?
It was the most glorious day that I can ever imagine. This young, indefatigable reporter named Connie Chung discovered it, and she was determined to find out how many Connies were out there, and she found so many. It became quite a sisterhood of Connies. So when I walked in to take a photograph with about a dozen Connies, so when I walked into that room, I was just so taken aback, and the Connies, certain Connies started crying, and I started crying. It was a moment that I will never forget. The Connies really gave me permission because I'm so Chinese. I'm so humble. I couldn't, get my arms around the idea that maybe I did leave a legacy.
I am among many who are grateful that you did it the way that you did.
Oh. Now, I'm not a crybaby, but you're going to make me cry?
The book is Connie, a memoir. The author is the iconic Connie Chung. Connie, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
And there's a lot more online, including our PBS News Weekly show, which looks at the escalating violence this week in the Middle East. You can find that on our YouTube page. And be sure to tune into Washington Week with The Atlantic tonight. Moderator Jeffrey Goldberg and his panel look at the state of the race for president and the latest funding fight on Capitol Hill. And tomorrow on PBS News Weekend, how a warming planet is affecting children. And that is the News Hour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the PBS News Hour, thanks for spending part of your evening with us, and have a great weekend.
Major funding.
Unprecedented, shocking, and coordinated attacks on Hezbollah rock Lebanon and stoke fears of a wider war. The U.S. tries to prevent escalation, but Hezbollah calls for revenge.
This will be confronted with a severe reckoning and just retribution in expected and unexpected ways.
Kids around the world have returned to school, including Israelis displaced by war in facilities far from their homes.
If the war ends, I want to go back.
While young Palestinians in Gaza seek safety and a place to learn amid the rubble.
I wish I could go to kindergarten and for the war to end and have a new home.
And we speak to the people who knew Turkish-American Ayşenur Eygi best after she was killed by an Israeli soldier in the occupied West Bank. Welcome to PBS News Weekly. I'm Nick Schifrin. It was a brazen attack on a scale never before seen in the Middle East. Thousands of pagers and walkie-talkies worn by members of Hezbollah exploded over 2 days, killing more than 20 and injuring more than 3,000. Israel has not taken official credit, but U.S. officials confirmed to me that Israel informed the U.S. it was behind the attacks and alerted American officials immediately before the explosions started on Tuesday, but without providing specifics. And on Friday, Israel said its airstrike on Beirut had killed senior Hezbollah leader Ibrahim Akil, wanted by the U.S. for his involvement in the 1983 attacks on the U.S. Embassy and Marine barracks in Beirut. At least 10 members of Hezbollah's Special Operations Forces were also killed in the airstrike. We now take a look back at the attacks on Hezbollah at the beginning of the week. Today, as thousands mourned at a Hezbollah funeral, they had to plan another one. Hezbollah walkie-talkies across the country exploded in Hezbollah members' hands, in Beirut's cell phone shops, and turned scooters into char. The attacks were aimed at Hezbollah militants, but exploded in civilian areas, even in Beirut living rooms, affecting families across the country. They will further inflame Hezbollah and its followers, one day after thousands of Hezbollah pagers blew up in markets, at cash registers, hitting militants where they're most vulnerable. Hezbollah communications networks tonight apparently compromised, and thousands of its rank and file injured, the group in disorder and demoralized. At the funerals today, a shocked and humbled Hezbollah vowed revenge.
This aggression inevitably has its own punishment. It has its own retribution. This punishment will come, God willing.
Officially, Israel has not taken responsibility, but a U.S. official confirms Israel informed the U.S. it was behind yesterday's and today's attacks. Today, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released a one-sentence statement.
I have said it before. We will return the citizens of the North to their homes safely, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
60,000 Israelis fled their northern Israeli homes after Hezbollah opened fire after October the 7th. There is widespread anger at the government that they are still displaced. Today, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, rumored just yesterday to soon be fired, said the government was united in shifting the war's goals away from Gaza.
The center of gravity is moving north, meaning that we are allocating forces, resources, and energy for the northern arena. I believe that we are at the start of a new phase in the war, and we must adapt.
The U.S. has tried to prevent all-out Israel-Hezbollah war with shuttle diplomacy to try and convince Hezbollah to move back from the border alongside a larger Gaza ceasefire. In Cairo today, Secretary of State Antony Blinken called for restraint.
We remain very clear about the importance of all parties avoiding any steps that could further escalate the conflict that we're trying to resolve in Gaza.
On Thursday, Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah vowed revenge. Today in Beirut, Hezbollah buried its fighters and vowed vengeance. And Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah promised to continue attacking Israel so long as Israel continues attacking Hamas in Gaza.
This will be confronted with a severe reckoning and just retribution in expected and unexpected ways. I will not talk about a time, form, place, or date.
But as he spoke, Israeli jets flew over downtown Beirut, and Nasrallah admitted that 2 days of unprecedented attacks on Hezbollah walkie-talkies and pagers had dealt the terrorist group a serious blow and compromised its security.
Tuesday and Wednesday were heavy and bloody days for us. They were also a big test. The important thing is not to let the blow knock you down, no matter how big and strong it is.
U.S. officials tell PBS News Hour Israel hopes that blow to Hezbollah's communication network convinces the group to pursue diplomacy. But there was no sign of that today. In Israel, soldiers rushed their injured to the hospital after Hezbollah attacks that also killed Sergeant Tomer Keren and Reserve Major Na'el Fouars. And Israel's military struck more than 30 Hezbollah sites with hundreds of rocket launchers, part of its shift away from Gaza, said Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant.
In the new phase of the war, there are significant opportunities, but also significant risks. Hezbollah feels that it is being persecuted, and the sequence of military actions will continue.
U.S. defense officials say Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin postponed his upcoming trip to Israel as the White House once again urged restraint.
We are concerned about the tension and afraid and concerned about potential escalation.
Tensions in the occupied West Bank continue to escalate as today Israel raided the northern town of Kabatia, where smoke billowed from residential buildings and a school was surrounded. Palestinian media reported 3 Palestinians were killed and a body was seen lying on the roof of one building. Another video shows Israeli soldiers dragging, kicking, and pushing 2 bodies off a rooftop. The Israeli military said the raids targeted Iranian-backed militants. Children around the world are returning to school, including in the Middle East, and for some, that's in the shadow of war. We have 2 stories now. The first from Tel Aviv, where some of the 60,000 Israelis displaced from their homes from northern Israel return to the routines of school, even though they can't return to their homes. It is a rite of passage with an armed escort. Students arriving on the first day of school after summer vacation, reuniting with old friends, and making new ones with new teachers and 9-year-old twins, Adele and Emma Azulay, and their mother, Liana. But this is not their school, and this city is not their home. They're the displaced, driven from their houses by war.
Most of my students, their house was ruined.
Ofer Zafrani is the superintendent of a school system whose teachers and students have been displaced across the country for 11 months. He says the instructors he briefed ahead of their first classes provide students an antidote to war.
I think the teachers in Israel in general are holding the torch of the hope. They are giving them schedule, something to wake up in the morning, something to do, a goal. All other things are in chaos.
Their homes were in Kiryat Shmona, hit by Lebanese Hezbollah rockets just yesterday, and on 200 separate occasions since Hezbollah opened fire on northern Israel the day after October the 7th. It's the largest town in northern Israel, right on the Lebanon border, mostly empty since the Israeli government forced residents to leave. Last weekend, Israel's military preempted a barrage of Hezbollah rockets and missiles, but some got through and hit homes nearby. A mother and 2 kids living here escaped at 5 a.m. thanks to an early warning with seconds to spare. Israeli Defense Forces spokesperson Anna Ukolov.
You can just imagine, you can see the damage here outside, and you can just imagine what could happen if this rocket was like a few centimeters and hit the house inside. Okay, so the family alive and everything is okay with them. Just, they don't have a place to live now. They need to look for something else. But they're safe, they're alive.
The northern communities are patrolled by soldiers whose own families are displaced, including Lieutenant Colonel Dotan Razili.
Hopefully soon, as the war ends, either with an agreement or either by us maneuvering into Lebanon, the civilians will feel safe, even my family will feel safe and come back and build this community again. But 10 months is a long, long time for a community like this to be empty.
Which has meant the Azule twins have lived since last October in this rented apartment, distracted by card games, longing for home.
If the war ends, I want to go back.
That longing is shared by the students' teachers, who must provide sympathy despite their own suffering. David Bubb teaches English.
Extremely challenging for all of us because we don't really have time to think about ourselves. Here at school we're not only teachers, we're psychologists, psychiatrists, mothers, fathers, brothers, anything you can think of. I'm worried about the students. They went through a really tough year last year. A lot of the kids dropped out of school and a lot of the kids have got lost.
And so on the first day of school, they try to recreate their lost community.
School is not so important to learn, but to be together socially, especially this year that we're separated all over Israel. This is the most important thing.
Israelis still suffer and live with national trauma from the violence and horror of October the 7th. But schools are trying to teach its lessons, especially to older students who will soon join a military that failed to protect the country or its own soldiers.
We thought that we have the strongest army in the world, and then October 7 happened. Next year they are going to go to the army, the same army that was unprepared to the October 7. And we must give them the lesson for what they need to learn from it. Not to be arrogant and not to repeat the history.
That lesson plan is being written in real time, and some answers cannot be found in a classroom.
Now can I ask a question? When can we go back to Kiryat Shmona?
It's a question that not only children ask, it's also a plea for this rite of passage to end for everyone. Meanwhile, most of Gaza's 560 schools have been damaged or destroyed. And that means 625,000 students in Gaza have no buildings to return to. In Deir Bala in central Gaza, the classroom is a tent. And the students, displaced children of war. Proud to contribute, eager to learn in a class rather than from the conflict they've been forced to endure.
We're trying to provide relief for children through education and play so they feel better mentally.
Taha Ibrahim is an elementary school teacher, himself displaced, and a volunteer with a French-sponsored program for kids.
As educators, we're trying to help students remember what they have learned and at the same time try and cheer them up and relieve them from the pressure they're under despite ongoing bombing and displacement.
In a neighboring tent, 8-year-old triplets, Lana Batul and Lin Abu Ase, with their younger sister Bisan, have a message for the kids around the world starting school this week.
We're supposed to go to school. Everyone is going back to school except us in Gaza. You're so lucky.
They've lost their home and been displaced multiple times, but have held on to their dreams.
Doctora. I wanted to be a doctor because I want to help people who aren't feeling well.
When I grow up, I want to be a teacher so I can teach kids and they can learn.
And so the triplets leave their canvas home in the Al Zawaida camp, which has been their refuge for months, and cross just a few steps over the sand to arrive at their canvas school. Tent classrooms like these are all that Gaza's children have. In a war where the UN says more than 9,500 children enrolled in schools have been killed, Gazans say the entire educational infrastructure has been eviscerated. The UN says at least 85% of Gaza's schools have been directly hit or damaged. And in this war, and in every war in Gaza, UN schools transformed to shelters for nearly 2 million displaced, like the Abu Hamisa school in Al-Barej camp. Classrooms once filled with students, now home to families with nowhere else to go. Clothes rather than chalk, dishes rather than drawings, a kitchen and a bedroom all piled up in a corner.
When we used to go to school, they would teach us that school is our second home, but now it is in fact our only home.
Onana Abu Al-Khair was studying to be a dentist at one of Gaza's top schools, Al-Azhar University, seen here before the war and today. The UN says all of Gaza's 12 universities have been damaged or destroyed. Israel blames Hamas for living in and fighting from residential buildings and using schools turned shelters as cover. Despite it all, Onana Abu Al-Khair tries not to forget what she's learned or what she's lost.
Gaza was beautiful, with its people, busy streets, and food. We want to go back to that because we cannot get used to the situation we're in right now. We are not resilient. We are forced and obliged to live this way.
Her mother, Suhair.
It's as if we're dying slowly while still alive. We want these young kids and students whose life was taken away from them to be able to live again, so they can get up, get dressed, wear their uniforms, eat breakfast, and go to school, see their teachers and their friends, study and excel.
But those are dreams deferred. UNICEF estimates all of Gaza's children, 1 million people, need mental health and psychosocial support. They have seen too much and had to grow up too fast. Miriam Al-Nabahin is 4.
Our home was bombed and there were injured people everywhere. There were rocks, little tiny rocks. I wish I could go to kindergarten and for the war to end and have a new home.
But for so many, there's no going back. Back home, back to school, back to what childhood is supposed to be. The United Nations this week once more called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and for humanitarian aid access there to be unimpeded. For insights on the challenges of getting aid into Gaza, I spoke to the official who leads the UN's Gaza Humanitarian Relief and Reconstruction. Sigrid Kaag is a Dutch politician, a former First Deputy Prime Minister, and diplomat with years of experience at the UN and throughout the Middle East. She is now the UN's Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza. She's visited Gaza often since taking over the job earlier this year, and today briefed the Security Council. Sigrid Kaag, thanks very much. Welcome to the NewsHour. In that briefing to the Security Council today, you said the war had, quote, turned Gaza into the abyss. What do you mean?
Well, everything is destroyed.
life has halted. Over 41,000 Palestinians have lost their lives and over 90,000 have been injured. And in that group you have a lot of women, children who've sustained life-changing injuries. So it is dystopian. It's also very strange when you go to Gaza, and I've been going in and out of Gaza over 30 years, to see that there's no buildings standing. The roads are destroyed. People are all huddled in tents. It's a total life-changing experience for everyone in Gaza and for those who try to work there, to render assistance. It is something that you cannot imagine, let alone describe.
Let me highlight one recent success before we get to some of the specifics you just said. Thanks to agreed pauses in the fighting, the first of 2 rounds of polio vaccines have been completed and have reached 90% of Gaza's 640,000 children. How have the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and UNRWA managed to do that in the middle of a war zone?
Well, this basically is because they agreed and worked closely with the Israeli Defense Forces. And at the political level, I've discussed it with the authorities that there should be humanitarian pauses. The parties to the conflict have agreed, and this gave the space to actually reach people safely and securely. But it also meant we needed the cold chain to work, the equipment, the vaccines to be in Gaza, and thousands of volunteers to be in a position to actually do their job. It demonstrates that you need political will to achieve these kinds of operations because it's highly complex and highly dangerous.
You noted today that the, quote, breakdown of law and order and looting of supplies are impeding assistance distribution. And you also said that there had been denials, delays, and a lack of safety for humanitarian workers. How short is Gaza of the assistance it needs?
Well, the gap is significant, let's face it, and it varies from day to day. It depends on the volume that actually is allowed in, that gets cleared and checked, but also the ability for humanitarians to come to the checkpoints, to the crossings, to retrieve it, to then actually take it back to the warehouses. And that's, of course, also where law and order, safety and security are serious issues. This is not only a matter of supplies to the crossings, it's also our collective ability to receive and distribute. And a lot more needs to happen in order to actually be affirmative in reaching those goals.
The UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or OCHA, says between the 1st of September and the 9th of September, only 62 trucks per day entered Gaza. But if you ask Israel, and Israel's coordinator for the government activities in the territories, or COGAT, they point out that commercial Palestinian trucks are entering 163 just yesterday. So why can Palestinians bring in trucks at a scale that the UN is unable or unwilling to do?
Well, I'm not going to make a blanket comparison here. What's important is that Gaza needs both. It needs humanitarian goods, because they're free of charge at the end of the day for the population, and it needs commercial goods. And the commercial sector has agreements with the IDF, but often it's the commercial sector from Egypt. It can also be from the West Bank or Israel. And they often organize themselves also that they have security on top of the truck, basically. As humanitarians, we can't do that. So we're both vulnerable, but we're also dependent on the approvals given. The most important comparator, I would say, is before the 7th of October, 1,000 trucks a day entered Gaza. So if you add up these statistics, on a good day, currently, 150 and 60, that's only 210. Now you can then easily conclude that it's nowhere near meeting the basic needs of the population. And the needs have only grown because the whole of Gaza lies in ruins.
As you know, Israeli officials question why there is any UN aid or humanitarian aid sitting inside Gaza. They point out the distribution problems within Gaza that you've struggled with. Why haven't you been able to overcome some of those distribution problems?
I would turn the question around. There are roles and responsibilities. Under international humanitarian law, the humanitarian workers need to be protected. They cannot be targets. The safety and security needs to be guaranteed. If the volume is too little or it's too unsafe because the fighting continues, humanitarians can't work. We need a ceasefire and we need the unconditional release of the hostages in order to actually start to reach people in a serious manner.
Sigrid Kaag, thank you very much. Finally, we turn to tensions in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. There, 26-year-old Turkish-American Ayşenur Eygi was shot dead by Israeli soldiers earlier this month while protesting Israeli settlements. Israel said her death was unintentional. President Biden said that was, quote, totally unacceptable and called for full accountability from Israel. Eygi's family said the president's statements weren't enough. I spoke to two of Eygi's friends, Juliet Majid and Kelsey Nabas. Kelsey Nabas, let me start with you. Can you tell me about your friend?
Yeah, so I met Ayşenur a couple years ago on a trip to Istanbul in Turkey. She was such a breath of fresh air and such a light in any room that she walked into. I knew that immediately I was going to be friends with her when I was introduced to her just because of how silly and fun and goofy she was. And I know that after a few conversations, we really hit it off and became super close friends.
Juliet Majid, what do you remember?
Yeah, so I met Ayşenur at the University of Washington. We both graduated this past June. She with a bachelor's in psychology and a minor in Middle Eastern cultures and languages. She was an incredibly hard worker. She was a very staunch activist. She was a community and a campus organizer, spanning many different solidarity movements and programs across the Seattle area. It's a profound loss that we are feeling in our community here in Seattle. And also, it's a profound loss for the American public in general to lose such a staunch American human rights activist.
Kelsey Nabas, why did she travel to the occupied West Bank?
As you just heard, Juliet said she was a staunch activist, and she knew that anything that she could have possibly done here on the ground between the UW encampment and going to protests and advocating for the liberation of the Palestinian people, she knew that going and being on the ground and observing the suffering and observing and witnessing what the Palestinian people were facing would be good for her self-conscious, and also just because she felt comfortable going and being a part of that community.
Kelsey Nabas, as you know, the Israeli military says that it is not defending illegal settlements and is in fact trying to crack down on what they call illegal outposts. And as you've seen, the Israeli military has said that she was not the target of this bullet, that what they called, quote, the instigator of the riot was the actual target and it was a ricochet. What's your response to that Israeli military statement?
I think what's important here today is that anyone should have the right to peacefully protest and peacefully observe a demonstration from an illegal settlement. I don't think that there was any right to have any live ammunition at that type of place. As we know, they were peacefully having their Friday prayer and peacefully demonstrating against the occupation of farmland in the region. And now they're saying that it was an accident, which is completely deplorable for my best friend.
Juliet Majid, what is your message? What is the family's message as well to the Biden administration today?
Yeah, so for me personally, I think that the Biden administration statement today was incredibly shameful to release comment about and support the evidence that the Israeli military gave without conducting an independent U.S. investigation into the killing of an American citizen is very shameful. And I don't accept that. I don't accept that we will accept the Israeli military's evidence or proof. What I want to see, what the family wants to see, is this independent U.S. investigation. Ayşenur was an American citizen. She was an incredible person, and she deserves justice. Her family deserves justice, and they won't get that without an investigation and without the evidence that they are requiring.
Kelsey Nabas, Juliet Majid, thank you very much to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's it for this week's episode of PBS News Weekly. For all of us, thanks so much for watching.